They moved my job to Georgia now, or was it Tennessee? Somewhere without a union and with taxes almost free. There's a right to work law and abundant poverty. What about the right to work for me?
Hey there, I'm Jesse Mayshark, and this is Headlights, Voices from the Progressive South. Headlights is a production of the Progressive South, a nonprofit media platform dedicated to amplifying progressive voices and values across the southern United States. Voices like Peyton Hopkins, who you heard up top. Hopkins was a pastor, labor activist, and folk singer who recorded 2 albums in the 1980s full of workers' anthems. I thought the title track of his 1981 album, They've Moved My Job to Georgia, would be a good way to start this Labor Day edition of the podcast. Because of the holiday, this is a somewhat abbreviated edition of Headlights. I do not have a featured interview this week. We'll be back next week with a great conversation with Steve Smith of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. But I wanted to mark Labor Day with a news roundup of labor and union efforts across the South. Hopkins' song points to some long-standing realities about labor in the South. This is and has been an anti-union, anti-workers' rights region of the country. That history of labor abuses begins with slavery, of course. Centuries of involuntary, unpaid servitude by generations of African prisoners and their descendants. But the end of slavery was hardly the end of exploitive labor practices in the South. In the years after Reconstruction, many former Confederate states created a system of convict leasing, using the loophole in the 13th Amendment that continued to allow unpaid labor for people convicted of a crime. By 1872, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas had created convict lease systems, under which private employers could rent prisoners for forced labor. The payments went to the state, not to the prisoners, and the vast majority of the prisoners who were leased were black. By 1898, a reported 73% of Alabama's total state revenues came from convict leasing. In many cases, black prisoners were leased to large farms that had previously relied on enslaved labor. At the same time as the Jim Crow order took effect across the South, even non-imprisoned black workers were routinely exploited for cheap domestic and agricultural labor. This also had the effect of suppressing wages for poor white workers. Convict leasing was slowly phased out, with Alabama the last state to ban it in 1928. But prison labor was still widely used by the states themselves via the notorious chain gangs sent to work on highway and infrastructure projects. One particularly egregious example was in Tennessee, where Brushy Mountain Prison was deliberately built on top of a coal seam so that the state could operate its own mining business using convict labor. The mine remained in operation, generating revenue for the state until the mid-1960s. As organized labor gained strength in the United States through the first half of the 20th century, conservative Southern leaders worked hard to minimize its gains in the region. They feared both the economic and cultural impacts of the labor movement, which had the potential to galvanize solidarity across racial lines and raise wages for workers of all races. In 1947, the federal Taft-Hartley Act allowed states to pass laws restricting unions from charging fees to any non-member workers, effectively banning the union shop model, in which all covered employees pay something to support a union in exchange for the protections it provides. These became known euphemistically as right-to-work laws, although their intended effect is to weaken labor rights and make it harder for unions to organize and advocate. Not surprisingly, many of the early adopters were Southern states. Florida was first, pioneering a right-to-work law in 1944. Arkansas, Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia followed in 1947, and Alabama, Mississippi, and South Carolina in the 1950s. Louisiana didn't pass its right-to-work law until 1976, and Kentucky, with a long history of labor organizing in its coal industry, didn't follow suit until 2017. The South's low wages, born of enforced racial discrimination, continued past the end of segregation. As the left-leaning Economic Policy Institute has laid out in a series of articles over the past 2 years, the South in the modern era has been dependent on an economic development model built around keeping both wages and union presence low. Research analyst Chandra Childers wrote for the EPI, "This model is defined by low wages, low taxes, few regulations on businesses, few labor protections, a weak safety net, and fierce opposition to unions. This model is marketed as the way to attract businesses into the region, with the implicit promise that this will generate an abundance of jobs and shared economic prosperity for all Southerners." But the results have been anything but the promised shared prosperity. Collectively, the South remains the lowest paid region of the country. We accounted for 6 of the 10 lowest median income states in 2023: Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, Kentucky, Alabama, and Tennessee. And all Southern states except Virginia were below the national median. And while unions have declined across the country over the past 50 years, the South has managed to remain at the bottom. 7 of the 10 lowest union membership states are in the South, and all Southern states are below the already low national average of 9.9% of the workforce. Kentucky, again because of its strong history of mine worker organizing, is the relative highest in the region, with 8.8% of its workers in unions. North Carolina is the lowest at a scant 2.4%. The South also has low minimum wages. 9 Southern states are no higher than the federal minimum of $7.25 an hour, which hasn't gone up since 2009. 5 of those, Alabama, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Tennessee, don't have a minimum wage law at all, so they defer to the federal level. All of that has made it a popular place for manufacturers to locate, or to relocate from stronger union states with higher wages in the Northeast and Rust Belt. That's what the Peyton Hopkins song is about. Of course, the currents of globalization eventually led many of those same manufacturers to relocate overseas or to Mexico. One of the problems with making low wages part of your economic model is that somebody can always offer even less. I talked about some of this in my interview with Nashville labor leader Vonda McDaniel this spring. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. McDaniel said that for all the obstacles to labor organizing in the South, she has seen increased interest in unions, particularly among younger workers. There have been some high-profile union drives in the South in recent years, some of them successful. The most dramatic was the United Auto Workers organizing drive in 2024 at a large Volkswagen factory in Chattanooga. After 2 previous unsuccessful efforts in 2014 and 2019, the UAW won a clear victory in last year's attempt, with 73% of the workers who voted choosing to unionize. The win came despite fierce anti-union lobbying from Tennessee Governor Bill Lee and other leading Republicans. The UAW lost a second major effort last year when workers at a Mercedes-Benz plant in Vance, Alabama, voted not to unionize. 56% of those voting voted no, and 44% voted yes. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey led the opposition, saying, quote, "The Alabama model for economic success is under attack." But the Economic Policy Institute reported that just forcing the company to even allow an election was enough to lead to some concessions, including a $2 an hour raise for senior employees and better advancement opportunities for more junior ones. Another milestone came in 2022 with the formation of the Union of Southern Service Workers. The cross-sector organization represents service workers across different industries throughout the South, under the umbrella of the SEIU, the large service workers union. If you heard our episode on the union-led deportation protests in Louisiana, you might remember one of the interviews was with Aisha Francis, a member of the USSW. But of course, organizing efforts across the country, and particularly in the South, continue to face uphill battles against powerful corporate owners. Earlier this year, an effort to unionize an Amazon warehouse near Raleigh, North Carolina, came up way short. 75% of the voting workers rejected the bid. The internet giant fought the drive relentlessly, as it has fought other unionizing efforts at Amazon facilities. North Carolina, of course, is one of 2 southern states that has a Democratic governor. Josh Stein was just elected last year with the endorsement of the AFL-CIO. Unlike his Republican gubernatorial counterparts, he did not weigh in against the Amazon organizing drive. But he also didn't do or say anything to support it. Instead, he hailed Amazon's planned $10 billion investment in a new data center in the state, without mentioning the union effort at all. Meanwhile, some southern states are introducing still more roadblocks to union organizing. Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee have all passed laws that would claw back any tax incentives or other state assistance given to employers if they choose to voluntarily recognize a union rather than forcing workers to go through the process of holding a vote. Tennessee State Representative Yusuf Hakim, a Democrat who represents Chattanooga, said the laws were par for the course in the region. It's typical, in my view, for southern states to have that kind of a mindset, he told State's Newsroom, to have less of a voice for workers as opposed to having an exchange between workers and employer. Or, as the Economic Policy Institute puts it, quote, "The Southern economic development model is designed to enable businesses to extract labor from large pools of workers as cheaply as possible." So, that's where we've been and where we are on this Labor Day. We'll let Peyton Hopkins sing us out.
You better stand up for your union while you can, with other working people hand in hand. I know there's nothing I can't do, and it's me with all of you. So stand up for your union while you can.
Hey, I just wanted to add something here. After we'd already recorded this episode, there was yet another union vote in the South. Last Wednesday in Hardin County, Kentucky, workers at an electric vehicle battery plant cast ballots in a unionization bid by United Auto Workers. The plant is owned by Blue Oval SK, a joint venture between the Ford Motor Company and the South Korean conglomerate SK On. The UAW claimed victory after voting showed 526 ballots in favor of organizing the plant to 515 votes against it. But there are 41 challenged ballots, enough to tip the balance, and Blue Oval SK is contesting the result. That will leave it up to the National Labor Relations Board to investigate and make a determination about the outcome of the vote. And the NLRB is one of several theoretically independent boards and agencies that President Donald Trump has sought to remake this year, by dismissing one Democratic-leaning member without cause and naming two of his own employer-friendly nominees. Until those nominees are confirmed by the Senate, the board doesn't even have a quorum to conduct business. So it may be a while until we know the outcome of the Kentucky vote. Still, it's another sign of serious union efforts in the South, so I wanted to mention it. And that wraps us up for this week. Remember, the Progressive South is a nonprofit media outlet, and you can find information about contributing to our efforts on our website, theprogressivesouth.org. If you do feel moved to make a donation, first of all, thank you. And second, make sure you make a note in the comments accompanying it that it is for the Progressive South. Thanks to Bark for our theme music, and to Lord Seth the Libertarian for his production work at Barbarian Productions. And thanks to you for listening. Remember, you can call and say hey from wherever you are. Just leave us a message at 865-214-7764. That's 865-214-PROG. Tell us your first name, where you're calling from, and take up to a minute to let us know what's going on where you are. You can also write me at jmayshark@theprogressivesouth.org. We'll talk to you soon.